Hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello. Mic check. Done? Five. Five. Six. Sorry. Six, six, six. Okay. Shall I start? मैं समझ नहीं पा रहा क्या. Hello? Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Abhishek Bhardwaj and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you back to the lecture hall complex at IIT Bombay for day 2 of Accelerating Clean Energy or ACE 2026. I request you all to take your seats and get ready for day 2 of ACE 2026. I hope you got some rest last night or to say the very least found a highly optimized fan-assisted cooling strategy or perhaps the chill of the ACs to survive this Mumbai humidity, especially after our intense track 2 roundtable on estimating thermal comfort yesterday. I also take this opportunity to thank one and all present here for joining ACE 2026. Thank you for your incredible journey in energy and rigorous engagement. Let's make day 2 just as impactful. As we settle in, I want to take a brief moment to connect the threads from yesterday's incredible sessions. ACE 2026 is anchored around one critical question. As demand accelerates and renewable penetration rises, what must hold for India's energy transition to scale reliably? Yesterday, we tackled the reality that our constraints are no longer just technological, they are perhaps deeply systemic. Navigating the daily realities of industrial solar operation makes these deep dives into infrastructure readiness and grid congestion feel especially urgent. ACE 2026 unpacks this master question through three deeply interlinked and interdependent thematic pillars. Each theme at ACE examines a distinct yet profoundly connected piece of India's evolving energy landscape, from the physical and operational infrastructural backing our grid to our rapidly shifting demand patterns, right down to the decentralized innovations critical for a resilient and inclusive energy future. Yesterday, we kicked off with a brilliant keynote from Ajay Shankarji and moved straight into the plenary exploring the realities of solar expansion and system readiness. We also heard from Padma Shri Professor Juzair Wasi from IIT Bombay, who talked about the story of scale that India has witnessed in solar expansion. As we begin our day 2 of ACE 2026, our first session is connecting the threads, which is reflections from day 1, which provides us a perfect opportunity for us to come together as a whole house after being split across different key themes on day 1. It is our chance to collectively step back, connect the threads, and reflect on the high-level insights that emerged across the entire conference yesterday. Over the next 30 minutes, we are going to connect the dots. We will hear directly from our track leads as they deliver the sharpest takeaways and core insights emerging from each domain. To move towards our track 1, which is the infrastructure readiness, we examined the physical and operational backbone of system reliability. Discussions ranged from predictive digital forecasting models to the safety frameworks required for scaling India's green hydrogen mobility ecosystem. The roundtable operationalizing resilience in transmission system, which was partnered with Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, focused on fortifying the physical backbone of our power systems against extreme hazards. Industry leaders discussed the urgent need for advanced data frameworks and network modeling to protect infrastructure, manage transmission congestion, and ensure grid reliability during disruptions. To kick things off, I would like to invite Amitesh Sirvaya to the stage to present the synthesis and takeaways from track 1. Amitesh, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhishek. So the first track was on the infrastructure readiness and system reliability, and it consisted of 2 things. First was the open presentation on the same theme, and the second was on the round table. So as far as the state of play consensus is concerned, there was a broad agreement that the India's transmission sector is increasingly exposed to the climate-driven and non-conventional risks that are not adequately expressed by the existing reliability-focused planning frameworks. And now we need to move beyond the reliability-focused, for example, N-1 contingencies, and include the resilience against high-impact, low-probability events. There is a growing evidence of extreme weather events also, such as heat waves, cyclone, local storms, landslides, heavy rains causing transmission line failures, system flooding, and renewable generation outages, creating a systemic bottleneck. There was also a consensus that resilience should be treated as a multi-dimensional concept encompassing the ability to anticipate, absorb, recover, adapt, and learn from disruptions. Participants agreed that network contingency, operational preparedness, and restoration capabilities need to be integrated into the transmission planning and operations rather addressed separately. On the presentation side, finally there was also an agreement that renewable energy heavy grids introduce a qualitatively new failure modes. For example, renewable outages due to cloud cover, inverter derating due to heat that overshadows the historical conventional contingencies. Most of the oral presentation focused on improving the supply side performance, such as analyzing green hydrogen policies, hydrogen vehicle safety, circular strategies for battery, GIS-based RE assessment, and an impact of shading on the performance of solar PVs. Across the presentation, the participant also highlighted that reliability is influenced not only by the supply side infrastructure, but also by the demand side flexibility, life cycle management of energy assets, and operational performances. If we move to the next point, that is what looks promising. So in the roundtable, the one point that came very clearly was the climate-informed transmission planning, including incorporation of climate-adjusted equipment ratings, multi-stress scenario analysis, for example, heat wave, plus high demand, plus network contingency for the same event, and integration of climate risk assessment into conventional planning studies. Similarly, the second point was the advanced analytical tools, particularly digital twins, AI and IoT-enabled asset monitoring, predictive maintenance systems, and threat monitoring approaches that stimulate failure scenarios and identify defense-in-depth strategies. Distributive resilience measures, including microgrids, state-level islanding capabilities, distributed storage, vehicle-to-grid or vehicle-to-home applications were also highlighted, which can provide additional layers of system resilience during emergencies. On the presentation side, it was being highlighted, and it was quite found useful, that community participation and locally driven decision-making were an important factor for improving sustainability and long-term success of decentralized energy systems. Similarly, reliability gains can be achieved not only through the new infrastructure investment, but also by optimizing the existing infrastructure through smart operations, improved asset management, and better coordination among stakeholders. Areas that need attention. Regarding the resilience planning, the standard and regulation lag the emerging realities. Current transmission planning standards lack explicit resilience definition, metrics and planning requirements. Resilience considerations are not systematically embedded in planning, design, investment approvals, or tariff recovery mechanisms. Data deficiency is the another area which needs attention because it remains a major barrier. Existing outage data is either incomplete, excludes the significant portion of the network, and suffers from inconsistent reporting. Now, this can be due to metering limitations or inadequate limited horizon input data, such as weather forecasting data. New vulnerabilities are emerging. These include cybersecurity risk associated with remote connectivity, concentration risk from large substations and long-distance HVDC corridors, supply chain constraints, and increasing dependence on weather-sensitive RE energy. The last point that needs, I think, attention would be the understanding the consumer behavior and incentive. While there was a talk about the demand flexibility interventions, we need to understand that before a widespread implementation of demand response mechanism, there is a need for deeper understanding of consumer behavior, demand elasticity across the different consumer categories, and the equity implication of such interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitesh, for capturing the core operational and physical infrastructure reality so clearly. We now move smoothly to our second thematic domain, which is demand and load transformation, which shifts the lens onto how our consumption patterns are evolving. We unpacked the sheer scale of India's residential cooling demand and analyzed how state-level DISCOM tariff designs directly dictate the EV adoption. The Track 2 Roundtable, Rethinking Cooling Demand in India, which was co-anchored with the Prayas Energy Group, tackled one of our most pressing climate challenges, the exponential rise in residential and commercial cooling needs. The panel debated on how to estimate escalating peak load demands while balancing technical solutions for thermal comfort with equitable energy access for all communities. To share the high-level insights from this track, please join me in welcoming NGR Karthik to the podium. NGR Karthik, over to you.
Thank you, Abhishek. And once again, good morning to everyone. My name is Karthik. Yesterday, there was a track 2. In this track 2, what we have trying to answer, or what we are trying to get to know the problem in detail, what are the implications of rising demand on the electricity grid, and the key opportunities presented in this. So first we had understood what is the problem. Now I would like to present what is the state of the play. First, we got to know that everybody from the round table as well as the oral presentations, they had clearly said that cooling demand is going to come. And you might have observed during the yesterday's event also, there was mentioned that 40% of the energy need may come from the domestic. So that's one of the highlights. So cooling demand is going to be emerging. So that's the first one. That's the first one. And the second one is that this demand growth becoming more dynamic. For example, like EV charging. Now EV charging, who will do at what time? Or what is the demand profile? It is too difficult to maintain. So that's what we got. And then there were 4 presentations overall. In that, one of the presentation is clearly mentioned that the cooling demand is going to be increased 2.5x by 2037 itself. And for that, there are different reasons. Either it might be our affordability, and it can be even comfort. Right now, more people want more than comfort. So that's the second reason. So what is the demand profile? So for that, we had understood what type of methodology people are using. And there was a round table. In that round table, there was an understood that everybody, if you go and talk to anybody, they said that, hey, cooling is not, comfort is not cooling. And the second speaker mentioned, clearly said that comfort is not equal to the cooling. And the second one is that cooling need and cooling demand are not the same. So from that Indian Cooling Action Plan also, it was clearly mentioned. So these are the things that came out of the one. And the second one is the third one is the flexibility. In this flexibility in the critical is critical for reliable scaling. So in order to increase our cooling demand, or either it might be from EVs or anything, the flexibility is going to be play a critical role. So for that, the storage, demand response, and thermal storage and flexible loads are going to be present. And the fourth one is that consumer-centric solution, which will shape our adoption. So these are the state of the play. Now coming to what looking promising. The first one is that, maybe I'll give an example now. Everybody wants AC. If you switch on the AC, and again we will putting more clothes on ourselves. So cooling and comfort, there is a difference between that. That difference, most of the people are getting awareness. Even like industries, when we are talk to the industries, they are clearly saying that, hey, this is the difference. It has to be go into the normal public. That's what it was clearly one. So this gaining attraction. That's the first one I would like to say. And the second one is that new approaches to demand. As we, in the first slide, we know that demand is going to increase. So to understand this demand, or to avoid any problems in the future, so there is a new approach to manage our shift loads, gaining research momentum. So we have seen this a lot of in the roundtable and in the oral presentations. People are clearly said that there is a research momentum is happening, both at academic as well as at the industries. So that's the second one. And the third one is that decision tools. Decision to support tools can enable informed choice. So during our presentations, it was clearly said that a tool, like 60 seconds of a tool, or reaching out to the normal public saying that what going to be EV, for example, EV charging, what are the perceptions. So decision making, going and reaching out in talking to a chai, or even an WhatsApp tool is going to help them. So that's what are promising. So if you are going and talking to the normal public, there is a response is coming up. That's a So the third one, with this I'll close. the areas of attention, momentum, need attention. That's what it was concluded in them. The first one is the peak demand management. So more and more gap has been identified. So more research or more policy-driven decisions has to come in this, the first one. And the second one is that infrastructure readiness. Infrastructure is uneven, that everybody knows now. So what change charging infrastructure? So how the charging structure has to come out? Where, how? Those are the questions that need more one. Storage deployment also. And the third one is the consumer awareness and workforce transition. Maybe I'll quote from one of the presentation. In the presentation, 2,000 lorry truck drivers has been surveyed and asked that, hey, are you ready to go for an EV truck? No, I'm not talking about a general two-wheeler or four-wheeler truck. So they said that there is an, during those 2,000 survey, 2,000 people are surveyed, they are shown interest. 94% has said that, yes, we want to try it out. So that's the kind of information awareness is to be increased further. That's a third one. And the fourth one is the planning frameworks and updating. So future future resource planning must better incorporate demand flexibility, distributed awareness, and thermal comfort needs, and consumer behavior. These are the things that, thanks, Abhishek.
Thank you, Karthik, for those valuable insights on how changing loads are reshaping our grid requirements. Our finalist synthesis presentation of the morning anchors us back to the grassroots and localized frontiers, innovation in distributed and hybrid systems. This track challenged our assumptions on decentralized energy. We explored the future of mini-grids, maximizing crop yields with agrivoltaics, and how these hybrid models must interact with our centralized grid infrastructure. The Track 3 Roundtable, Future of Mini-Grids and their interaction with the centralized grid infrastructure, organized alongside Sitara, IIT Bombay, and Clean, unpacked the evolving relationship between decentralized energy and the main grid expansion. The experts scrutinized the business viability of rural mini-grids, productive use energy models, and the regulatory adaptations needed to sustain distributed hybrid systems. To bring together the final piece of today's puzzle, I invite Arundita Bhanjdev to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. So track 3 was on innovations in decentralized and hybrid energy systems. And yesterday, track 3 brought together a roundtable on the futures of mini-grids and around 8 research presentations spanning rural parts of Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, urban Gujarat, farms of Telangana and Maharashtra, and also cooperative panchayats of Kerala. Our research question was, which we based our track 3 was, what key enablers can drive innovations in decentralized and distributed energy systems, and what are the critical barriers that constrain its deployment. So how the state of play looks is, the clearest consensus from yesterday that emerged was that the sector has sort of moved into a new phase, which has been there for some time, that deployment has accelerated, but the institutional, regulatory, and financial systems required to absorb those deployments have not sort of kept pace. So across mini-grids, agri-PV, and distributed storage, the binding constraints are governance, policy coherence, the lack of working capital to scale, and not really so much technology, which sort of seems to be sorted. The second agreement is harder to acknowledge, but important also to acknowledge, is that access patterns in decentralized systems tend to still replicate existing hierarchies of caste, income, and political power. A research from a village in Uttar Pradesh showed granularity that infrastructure lands where lobbying power is sort of greatest, and not where the exclusion is deepest. While this is not the case everywhere, and there are sporadic pilots which are focusing and targeting on the excluded and the more remote parts of the country, but this seems to be a pattern that the experts spoke about and needs to be acknowledged. The third point of consensus is something that is typified by Professor Anand Rao's comment that why do we always put the onus on distributed renewable energy to explain its viability and sustainability, which we do not do with systems, institutions, and also, if I may, with the main grid. So that asymmetry sort of shapes every conversation that is had on agri-PV economics, on mini-grid finance or community energy models. That needs to be named and challenged. What's looking promising is, what's looking promising is 5 directions show genuine traction. Hybridization changes the economics of distributed systems significantly. There's an IT Bombay research yesterday showed that diversifying beyond solar, which is including wind and biomass, can cut battery storage requirements to a good amount. And this deserves far more attention in design standards and tendering. The second was women-led delivery architectures are working at an operational scale. So we heard about 2 models in Bihar, both based on the state's rural livelihood mission, which is Jivika, and those models demonstrate multi-year durability across low-income and flood-prone geographies. What they share is a consolidation of distribution, servicing, and trust into a single locally embedded actor, which is the self-help group. And the evidence base here is now substantial enough to move beyond the pilot logic. The third promise is that community ownership emerged as the most compelling just transition model we heard yesterday. In Kerala, a panchayat with over 1,000 rooftop solar installations is piloting community-owned battery storage and has shifted midday surplus to evening peak, selling back to the utility and also generating local revenue. The state government now has also committed 100 crore rupees in the new budget to this. This is what a structural equity, energy equity looks like in practice. The fourth is we also heard about upstream urban energy planning, which integrates load forecasting into statutory land use decisions before sort of zoning lock-ins, and that can prevent decades of costly retrofitting. For example, we heard from PS Collective prototype that makes the connection between planning decisions and grid impact visible to planners in real time, and also the importance of spatial, the use of spatial planning for interlinkages between energy and other development sectors were highlighted across the day in tracks 1 and 2 as well. And lastly, the last promise that we saw was on agri-PV, where there are multi-year pilots that show that land equivalent ratio is now around 2, and the ideal is 1. Water savings of around 30%, and there is maintained or improved yields across diverse crop groups. So the case for agri-PV technology is sort of made at this point. But the policy and finance architectures need to catch up. And there are 5 areas that need attention. One is equity gaps are structural, and it will not be closed by supply side expansion alone. Flat financial interventions like subsidy or connection target do not address physical remoteness, absence of formal identity, or the relational power dimensions. Policy design needs to be more targeted, and it needs equity disaggregated data to do that work. The evidence base is still thin as compared to the policy ambition, particularly for newer technological applications like agri-PV. Findings are concentrated in small parcels with small number of sites under specific conditions, and there's no common validated methodology to measure what is benefit, what are co-benefits, how can replicability data which works across diverse agroclimatic zones. So we are sort of extrapolating policy by far too few sites. Third is finance models. We heard also across the day that have not kept pace with the deployment. The levelized cost of electricity, or the LCOE of most distributed systems, remain above grid parity without sort of blended finance or innovative models like carbon revenue. And there was also a point made on regulatory frameworks, which is sort of lagging, that grid interactive distributed systems or mini grids which can extend to DISCOM serviced areas sort of still operate in legal gray zones in most states because of the ambiguities in Electricity Act. National schemes have not meaningfully earmarked support for mini grids, and state level action is reasonably uneven. And finally, operational performance of distributed and hybrid systems is poorly tracked. The loads are evolving and the components continue to degrade, but there is an absence of longitudinal monitoring, but in general monitoring overall, which and this means that we are making policy and investment decisions without adequate evidence. And the roundtable proposed a sort of a shared, the sector to come together to create a shared data portal with disaggregated data also, and this could be a simple practical step worth taking on if clean members are here. And in the end, I will not belabor on what the sessions have already made clear, but so the models exist, they are working, and the technology is ready. The challenge now is building the institutions, the regulatory, the financial, and the governance conditions that allow them to scale across diverse contexts for the communities that need them the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Arundhita, for bringing together the key discussions from this important theme. And thank you to all our presenters for synthesizing the key insights from yesterday's session. I'd request all of you to provide a round of applause for all our speakers before we move into the next session. What became clear across all the three rooms is that solving these bottlenecks requires bringing engineering, fiscal policy, and institutional design into the exact same frame. And this brings us perfectly to our agenda for today. If day one was about diagnosing our system strains such as transmission congestion, DISCOM fiscal stress, and supply chain vulnerabilities, day two is about moving towards solutions. Today, we transition from diagnosing the strain to identifying the actionable conditions for reliable acceleration. As we look at the landscape of 2026, India is entering a dynamic new phase of development where electricity is no longer just a metric on a utility dashboard, but it is a literal backbone of our economic growth, climate resilience, and social well-being. Between skyrocketing space cooling demand, the rapid electrification of heavy transport, and the explosion of data centers, our landscape is growing increasingly complex. But the trillion-dollar question, quite literally, is how do we satisfy this massive hunger for power while keeping it completely clean, perfectly reliable, and most importantly, affordable for the end consumer? It's a delicate balancing act. If you prioritize only speed, you strain the grid. If you focus only on cost, you might miss your climate goals. To unpack this high-stake puzzle, let me take you to our plenary 2, meeting India's rising electricity demand while ensuring clean, affordable, and reliable power for all. We have assembled an extraordinary panel of policymakers, system planners, and industry giants who collectively represent over a century of hands-on experience in keeping India's lights on. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists to the stage as I introduce them. Shri S.R. Narasimhan, who is a senior fellow at WRI India and former chairman and managing director of Grid India. He has masterminded virtually every facet of our country's power grid evolution, from interconnecting regional grid to designing real-time electricity reforms. If there is anyone who knows what exactly happens when millions of people switch on their air conditioners simultaneously, it is him. Dr. Nilesh Kane, who's the Chief of Transmission and Member Distribution at Tata Power. With over 30 years of versatile experience across generation, transmission, and distribution. He's a certified energy auditor and a member of various standard committees under the Bureau of Indian Standards. It's an absolute forefront of transmission footprint, expansion strategy, and executional excellence in transmission projects in India. Please allow me in welcoming Mr. Vivek Subramaniam, who's the co-founder and executive director of Fourth Partner Energy and WRI India Advisory Board. Vivek is a passionate advocate for commercial and industrial energy independence. He has dedicated his career in proving that clean energy can deliver strong financial returns for investors while maximizing environmental impact. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Roshni Shah, who's the lead and general manager of energy transition at Apraava Energy. Roshni brings over 17 years of deep sector expertise in evaluating massive clean energy projects. She's a leading expert on emerging flexible storage model, including standalone BESS, merchant storage, round-the-clock, and firm and dispatchable renewable energy solutions. She has been at the forefront of developing and evaluating large-scale clean energy transmission and battery storage opportunities across India. Please welcome Chandana Sasardhan, who is the Program Research Fellow at WRI India. Chandana's cutting-edge research maps the exact synergies between efficiency interventions in buildings, transport, and the power grid to help states facilitate holistic decarbonization policies. Last but not the least, leading today's discussion as our session moderator is Professor Satish B. Agnihotri from the Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas, IIT Bombay. As a career bureaucrat, Professor Agnihotri has navigated everything from rural development and public policy to renewable energy scale-up. He's a master of cross-sectoral collaboration, which is exactly what we need to bridge the gap between abstract energy theory and the practical realities of the grid. We will begin the session with a brief context-setting presentation by Chandana to frame our core objectives, followed by an open panel discussion steered by Professor Agnihotri. Over to you, Chandana.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Chandana. I am an electrical engineer, but what I say every day is try to be less of an electrical engineer and more of a person who thinks more about social and economic context and not, because energy transition is actually not a technological challenge. It's a different sort of a challenge which needs a different mindset. So today's topic for the day is about how do we meet India's rising electricity demand. As Abhishek has rightly put in front of you, electricity demand is growing in India. It is growing in such a pace that it is needed to meet our development, it is needed to meet our climate goals, but there are also demand disruptors coming into the equation like data centers. That is a space we are in. Yeah. If a picture can say 1,000 words, this would be one picture that helps me set the context very easily. So this is a story of May 21st. Which was the highest recorded electricity demand day in India, which tells you the story of how the demand happened and when the demand was met. What is interesting for most of us in the story is the yellow part, which is the solar. So the daytime demand, 22% of that we were able to meet with solar, which is a good achievement. And the peak contribution from solar was estimated to be around 60 gigawatt, quite good. However, we still had to reach and cater to the demand of 270 gigawatt, which actually happened over a period of 3 to 5 days of intense heat waves happening in India. And what we saw during that day, are you able to see the slide? Yeah, all right. Yeah. So what happened during that day is that the thermal power had to cater to a huge part of the daytime demand as well. And what happens when the sun is not there in the non-solar hours? Obviously, as Narasimhan sir will tell you, the grid operator needs to have a big role in ramping down the generation during the sun hours to accommodate for the net demand and also ramp it up to the evening demand. But what we see is that is the exact same day when we hit the highest electricity demand in the evening as well, which was 251 megawatt. Now that lies your problem because only 1% of it we were able to meet with storage. Wind was able to contribute roughly 8%, but the full story is that still 75% of your demand was catered by thermal sources. Hydro was less, roughly around 10%. What is also interesting about the story is this paradox that we see. Even on the highest demand day, we had RE curtailment. This was probably lesser than the other days. It was 3 gigawatt, but the unmet demand for that day was actually at least twice of the RE curtailment that happened. So this is an interesting paradox that is coming in front of us even on the high demand days. To give you a picture on how electricity demand has grown over India across different sectors. So as you can see, starting from 1950s, we had around 5,000 gigawatt hours of requirement in a year. And primarily at that time, industries was catering to the highest demand. It was like roughly, I think till almost 1990s or 2000s, industry would contribute to 50% of electricity demand requirement in India. But what we see, especially from the 90s onwards, is the agricultural as well as the residential demand increasing very heavily. So residential currently contributes to 25%. That is like the electricity that is consumed by our homes, including air conditioners at this point, is closer to 25% of electricity demand requirement in India. And agricultural segment, which is being heavily solarized with solar pumping and all of that, that demand is also quite severe. One thing I want us to note here is, look at the share of transport in this segment. So transport is actually rightly mentioned as traction under this objective because it's only the power that is taken by Indian Railways. That is very less at 2%. Now imagine the situation that would happen when EVs would come into the grid. You are only going to contribute to roughly 2% of the demand. Now this brings me to the third picture. I intentionally did not put, which sector contributes to what share. This is the overall energy picture. But what I wanted to bring more attention is to this fact that electricity, earlier it was only 1/5 of India's entire energy demand was being catered from electricity. We also saw another interesting aspect of that. A huge percentage of that, closely 70 to 75% of that is also coming from coal. But from an energy perspective of India, this is a picture for FY 24-25. We know this picture will change in the future, but what I want us to see is that a huge share of energy is still being met with fossil fuel sources. Particularly, we should pay attention to the industrial and the transport segment, which are growing also in nature. The volume of industrial output is expected to go. We have new industries that are to come. My colleagues from transport are also here. They'll also tell us, particularly, we are also going to see a huge expansion in the transportation energy requirement, particularly coming in from the freight segment. There's a session focused on that today as well. So that's what you see. So the growth is going to happen from industrial growth as well as the other factor. Where is the fossil fuel coming from? The fossil fuel is actually coming from a huge amount of imported sources. 90% of our liquids are exported, roughly around 50% of the gas is exported, and nearly 25% of coal is also exported. That is a question on India's energy security. What happens to the other sectors? Residential, commercial, and agriculture, which has still higher share of electrical energy, therein we'll also see the same phenomena. There's going to be a natural organic growth in those sectors because we are going to have more buildings, we are going to have probably more electricity demand for agriculture as well. In particular, if you look at the residential segment, which is the growing segment, we could see, two different lines that is happening. One is on air conditioners. That is actually for the climate adaptation perspective. We had a session on thermal comfort yesterday, where we had huge set of experts come in and talk about that. So air conditioners, right now the penetration is said as it's nearly around 10%. If this is a situation with only 10% of Indian homes having air conditioners, can we imagine a situation where every home in India is having air conditioner? But we also need to ask another question. Is one air conditioner in one home equal to thermal comfort for an Indian home? That might not be the right answer to look at it as well. Also, let's bring attention to the fact of electric cooking. Wherever residential emission or residential fossil fuel requirement is coming from is actually the electric cooking. We saw that because of the geopolitical tensions that happened, there was a sudden spike in demand for induction heaters that happened recently. Currently, only 2% of Indian homes are using electric cooking. That was on the upper end. This is a stage when we had reached near-term 100% LPG electrification. That is where in electric cooking could happen. And then from a commercial segment, there could be more aspects, because commercial overall right now, their share in electricity demand as well as their share in overall energy demand is very, very less. They are less than 5% share at this point. But what is going to happen when we have huge energy guzzlers like data centers that are going to come? That could completely transform the commercial segment, because data center close to 40 to 70% of their requirement is estimated to be cooling requirement, and they are coming in a hot weather in India. So then what happens to us? Some of these perspectives we have tried to capture here, but this picture might also be incomplete, because there could be more drivers within this ecosystem. It might be coming from the need for more agricultural pumping, because we are looking at drought days. There could be the net demand changes that is coming from rooftop solar adoption. There could be many drivers we don't know, but this is a piece of the research that we are currently doing at WRI India with the support of a large set of my colleagues, and it's my privilege to present that. Now, what we do and what we discuss today is that we know demand growth is going to happen. What we are interested in, the demand growth should not be at the cost of clean energy. It should not be at the cost of affordability or reliability of power. How do we find this balance between power reliability, affordability, as well as not hurting the clean energy agenda? So you have a good set of speakers in front of you and a very good moderator who will guide us through that discussion. I'll pause here. Thank you.
Am I audible to the last bench? Yeah. That's the first thing we do in IIT. Firstly, thank you, Chandana. She's done a very good job. She leaked the question paper. We are quite adept in that exercise. She also provided partial answers. So made my job much easier. Yes, yes. Yours has no, but the bad news is coming. So, and she also did one interesting thing. She got herself exempted from questions being asked. She said, "मैंने तो पर्ची already दे दी है." Right? Okay. So with that caveat, I think let me put the whole thing very in a very brief manner. After hearing yesterday's deliberations and a brilliant keynote by Dr. Ajay Shankar and what Chandana has presented, what's the problem that we are looking at? Is the problem which an Indian farmer looks at when he is going to purchase a milch cow. And in Marathi when they say, kashi gaay havi hai, kaisi gaay chahiye? तो छोटे सींगों वाली, दुधारू, लात ना मारे और दाना कम खाए. So what's the kind of energy demand that you have? Round the clock, reliable, affordable, बहुत कम constraints impose किए, एक बचा था clean. So what's happening is, with this kind of it's an n-dimensional equation with about n plus 5 constraints. So you can imagine what's going to happen. But luckily what Chandana did was, she only said, where do we stand today? So she is saying, abhi apni asking run rate itni hai. What compounds this cricket is, as you keep batting, either say asking run keeps going up. So you have the scoreboard wala on your side. So if you have stepped it up to 7 runs per over, udhar dikhta asking run rate has now gone to 14. And that happens because of these future unstated guzzlers, and about which no one better than Mr. Narasimhan, how does he see this unfolding, and which are the demand drivers which are going to overtake us from the wrong side. So on that, and then we will have just one round first, and then the second round where we will come to where does RE come into picture in all this. So over to Mr. Narasimhan, please.
Yeah, thanks, Professor, and good morning, everyone. So what Professor has asked, like all these figures, a word of caution before we interpret all these figures. Whatever figures that are reported, both at Grid India, CA level, they are actually the demand incident on the transmission grid. So it doesn't capture behind the meter generation. This was not a problem till 3 years back, when behind the meter we had essentially captive coal and predominantly coal. But now this rooftop solar which has touched 28 gigawatt these days. So that has made a impact, like when we look at these figures, like even 270, what Chandna mentioned, 270 gigawatt on 21st May, we would have had 16 to 18 gigawatt of rooftop solar behind. So that's not captured. So actually the consumer load would be of the order of 288 if I don't count the captive coal and all that, because captive coal is pretty steady, you can't, so for comparison's sake, it's fine. But rooftop solar is making a big dent, So word of caution, all these figures which get reported about the growth rate, if you take 2018-19 as a normal year and 25-26, the CAGR in terms of electricity consumption or peak demand has been of the order of 4.5% to 5%, right? But it doesn't capture behind the meter water resources. So that's one thing. And but then this 4.5% to 5% doesn't tell the entire story. The devil lies in each season. I'll start out with winter. What happens? Winter, essentially now there's a thrust of shifting all agriculture load to the solar hours. So the nighttime load in winters is not increasing at that pace. And it's much slower. But there's a huge ramp from 4 a.m. in the morning to 11 a.m. It's almost, we have touched 85 to 90 gigawatt of that order. And so the support, where all would you get from? What are the resources which we have? So essentially hydro is limited. We all know in winter, it's just 1.5 hours in the morning, 1.5 hours in the evening. So hydro doesn't provide all the support. Solar complements this nicely, but the danger is all our solar is on the western part of the country and starts coming only after 8 a.m. So that's something, when we talk about one sun, one world, one grid, that one sun in eastern region we are not capturing, So that's something, we talk more about interconnection of grids, but capturing that one sun in the eastern part of the country, that becomes very important. And this ramp, so after 8 a.m. it's fine, like solar provides very good ramping, and since the capacity addition in solar has been good. But when you talk about this new generation loads, electric cooking, so I am not a very great fan of electric cooking, though I use it to prepare tea in the morning. But, if you look at rampant electric cooking, it's a highly inelastic load, right? You can't expect people to change their cooking timings. It would be 1.5, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. And this would lead to a huge ramp. It's a highly hostile load, very poor load factor of the order of 15%. And you would need a lot of ramping resources. So that doesn't get captured in all the studies. If electric cooking were to really be rampant, it could touch even 100 gigawatts and ramping. And so the kind of resources that we need to have for supporting this ramp, that becomes very important. So I personally, like, if consumer switches on their own to electric cooking, it's fine. But as a policy thrust, somehow I'm not a very strong advocate of electric.
How about the data centers?
So data centers, currently, yes, India, it's just, the interest is growing. And, but that would be essentially sort of base load, unless the AI-based data center, they have a different kind of profile, because depending on, when a token phase, it's there, when ChatGPT tokens are exchanged, that time the demand would rise and then fall sharply. So those type of minute-to-minute variations, they are more important. But if it's a normal data center just for storage and other things, it's relatively a base load kind of thing. So there, of course, that should get captured in the resource adequacy. And so I mentioned winter. So winter morning is going to be very severe. So 3 months in a year, we are in for trouble going forward, especially with electric cooking. And the second is, of course, summer. We have all seen. Summer. One more thing which bothers me is that this air conditioning load. That's right from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. 12 hours in a day. That's the kind of, all our coal fleet was actually operating at full blast. 92% of the country's coal fleet was up and running. So that creates, when we talk about alternatives to coal, so I'm not sure whether this 4-hour, 6-hour battery energy storage would really help in this heat wave conditions in April and May, because you don't have any other resources. Hydro is just quite low at that point of time. So this is another area, none of our studies, unfortunately, it has captured the need for beyond 6-hour storage. But this month, summer is going to be critical. So I'll stop here. Sure. These two data points.
Yeah. Though if I trust Chandana, Niti Aayog talks in terms of a huge demand increase due to data centers. I mean, we are looking at something like 16 gigawatts 2030 and 105 by 2070. So, but 2070 kisne dekha hai, so let's not worry about it. But I'm coming to Dr. Nilesh, because you talked about behind the meter, Mr. Narasimhan, but he's more bothered about further to the meter what happens. So all this problem, what is the consequence on the distribution system? And that's where you are best placed to tell us what are the strains and how do you see this impacting the distribution system, the whole planning, especially these ramping needs which are becoming more stringent. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. Regarding distribution, obviously, what is being discussed, all these type of the loads are coming, the cooling loads are increasing. Data center, if you ask me about, the distribution company I'm looking after. So in Mumbai right now, we have around 400 megawatt of a data center load. And as he rightly mentioned, the AI data centers are likely to come over a period of time, and we are expecting another 1.5 gigawatt over a period of time. And in, in New Mumbai corridor also, around 5 gigawatt of the data centers are also likely to come. And the government policies are, such that all these data centers should be the green data center. So all these people are also trying to get the power from the outside and all. So most of the power, all these data centers, being a green center, will be brought through the open access from the outside. So the challenge to the distribution system is the data center expectation of having the best of the reliability is, the topmost thing. So you need to give N-1, N-2. So you need to expand, and network planning is to be done in such a way that your network should be capable of taking the complete, the load of the data center in such a way that giving the best of the reliability. And all these data centers are not only asking, the two source or three source connectivity, but also they are also asking that the green power support should be given and to the data centers and all. If you ask me from the residential and commercial, the customer base point of view, cooling load is increasing in a big way. EV load is also increasing in a big way, and all these loads are coinciding. And as you earlier asked, the challenge of the distribution company is to give the best of the power, best of the reliability at the cheaper cost. Is the challenge for all of us. Because what happens, the major cost for the distribution company, around 80% of the cost what we are spending as a distribution company is in power purchase cost. And in the evening time or in the morning time, during the peak time, EV is also coming up, cooling load is also coming up, everything is also coming up. And now everybody wants to go for a green power, whole lot of power is there during the daytime. Rather the distribution companies are land up doing the distress sale. We have excess of the power. We are selling power in the market at say 80 paisa, 90 paisa, and during the peak time in the evening, we will end up purchasing power at 10 rupees. So the challenge is how to balance all these, the power requirement of the customer to meet the expectation of the customer, giving them the green component more. Right now, say we started with 5-10% of the RPO. Right now, we are 40% of the RPO. And in time to come, we may reach to 70% of the renewable power. But if you are increasing your portfolio with more of a renewables, obviously you need to balance that. And over a period of time, I will speak. The customer participation is very important in a distribution to balance the network, to balance the load, and balance the power purchase cost.
Thank you. I think that was very well put. But there you also, I think, created a ground for the next question to Vivek, because you are saying that we are wanting this particular green power, and it's interesting to hear from you that in some senses you also have similar situation like the Indian farmer who does distress sale of sabji at one point in time and then sells it at a very high cost at a later point in time. Quite interesting. But then Vivek, this is what I will call is, do you look at it as a apda mein avasar for the renewable segment? That here's a set of customers who are looking at demand, supply from the RE side. Is there really some kind of a scope, role of renewable energy in this kind of scenario?
Thank you, sir. As a context, and I want to give the context to the response that we will give is basically, so Fourth Partner Energy, the firm that I represent, we supply energy to corporates. So largely in this context, you must, again, to put it in from the purpose of for the audience in the sector, this is the sector that consumes about half of India's power. This is the sector that pays the highest price of power because residential and agri are subsidized in forms. Essentially, a lot of these consumers are driven to reduce their price of power to a large extent, and largely are adopting renewables to help in that direction to reduce the cost of power. And of course, they have renewable energy mandates and want to get there. I think we were talking about, like the comment mentioned, about data centers and the need for them to be green. But even when we speak to our data center clients, the first conversation that they have is to basically bring out the cost of power as the key driving criteria for the optimization. So any optimization that you're running in the process of saying how his energy needs are going to be met in the next few years, the price of power is the important consideration that they are keeping their eye on. Now, in this context, sir, to your question, I think there's a great opportunity. Of course, demand is going up at an individual home level, but at the corporate level as well. Significant increase in demand is ramping up. Almost all our clients, and we service about 400 clients across India, all of them have expansion plans which they are mapping out. And now, more than ever before, the choice of locations for some of what they are going to be looking at is driven out of where they can get renewable energy sources or where the policy is conducive to allow them to lock in their lower energy costs for the duration of 20-25 years. Now, so that's one. Two, this is the traditional, what you would call industrial sectors per se. As we know, commercial itself, there's a massive urbanization, and the urbanization concept largely centers around air conditioning loads in buildings, and these are constantly only going to keep going up to where that is. The third is newer age corporates like data centers, etc., which were largely benefiting from what we were using service providers in the West, but now mandate is coming more and more that these centers be located in India, and massive capacities that are coming available in all of these options now. So largely when you look at that kind of a map out for where we are going to be, say for the next 5, 10, 20 years, and it's a comment we should make very carefully as entrepreneurs. Demand does not worry us as much. So there is plenty of demand if I were to be a generator and supply to corporate customers. What we really spend a lot of our time, energy and focus on is how are we going to fulfill that demand, the supply side. And the supply side largely covers building of the renewable energy plants in the form of land aggregation, getting the capacities right, getting the components right from wherever they are, meeting the policy regulatory constraints imposed time to time to promote domestic manufacturing and so on. So allowing for that to come about, then making sure we get grid connectivity and are able to evacuate the entire power that we are generating, and adhere to the standards that the grid is now imposing more and more. And I can tell you in a duration of the last 6 to even 12 months, if you were to put the standards for what is being demanded from renewable energy generators as they are connecting into the grid has gone up significantly, and which is, of course, a whole learning process for the industry, for the developers, for the component suppliers, because finally if I'm a power plant, I'm an aggregation of different components, and those components must meet the standards that the grid is setting on us. And all of this typically in India is a bit of a pendulum, right? I mean, so we sort of adhere a standard and suddenly it happens overnight, and it takes some time for everybody to get their act together. But largely these are the kind of challenges that keep us going. So the opportunity is there, sir, to your question, but the execution of that opportunity and realizing that opportunity is what keeps us awake as always in India.
Thank you very much. In fact, it was a sense of deja vu when you said that requirements are becoming more and more stringent, because as Secretary Renewable Energy, Government of India, we had this running battle with the power ministry. And in one of the workshops I had actually said that your constraints that you are making more and more stringent seem to be more designed to curtail the use of renewable energy rather than improve the quality of the services. The frequency and the voltage band, it started shrinking the more and more the renewable energy thing came up. But I at that time made a remark which angered the power secretary. I said, ठीक है, you keep raising the benchmark, pass marks अगर 30 से 70 चले जाते हैं तो एक दिन हम 70 पे भी पहुंच जाएंगे. So maybe 70 पे पहुंच जाएंगे might happen. But that brings me, in fact, that naturally brings me to Roshni, because we are looking at this, how do we do it? The big question is, where does the money come from? And can the private sector money come? Because if he's saying avsar hai, private sector usually takes these statements with more than a pinch of salt, maybe half a spoonful, etc. So how do you look at it? What Dr. Nilesh said, how we are going to require it in future. Dono suna, he is saying abhi demand hai, demand doesn't worry us. Would you put your money into it? उस पे आप रोशनी डाल दीजिए थोड़ी.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, my fellow panelists. Thank you, Chandana. So, मेरा पैसा तो नहीं है, so I'll talk from the perspective of the money that is coming from the corporates. So I think, as you rightly put, the problem here is people want everything in the power that they're getting. A, affordable. Second, RTC, round the clock. And third, clean. Now, when we try to put all the piece of the puzzle together, the power can't come at what rate the power comes for a solar plant together. And there is where the challenge is for the private sector, right? As soon as there are bids which happen in with higher tariff, DISCOMs are not ready to sign PPAs. So to give you perspective, there are bids which have happened in the year of 2025, mid-year, and those PPAs are not yet signed. Forget anything else, the dollar itself has making the investments not viable for the private sector. And the West Asia crisis has just added further to it. But even if they had not happened, the dollar in itself took away all the returns that were shown on the Excel sheet. So I think private sector is ready to put in money. There is, as he rightly said, demand is not a constraint. There is a lot of demand. There is a lot of opportunity. The only issue which the private sector today has is what is the consistency of I making the money out of it? Because if DISCOMs are going to offtake this, A, I have no surety on they signing my power purchase agreements, and B, once I supply power, of course there are schemes which the government have come up where they are assuring money to be paid to private players, but still on ground it's taking a while. So that is where the challenge is. Money today is not an issue. India is a growing market. Apart from money coming only from India, outside India also people see as India a growing market, an opportunity, and energy security is there which we need to achieve if we have to grow. So the story is right. The only problem or the only issue is, I think not the problem is, how do we ensure that the person investing money keeps making the money? Like the curtailment issue, right? When there is curtailment in, and as rightly said by sir, that all the sun is on the west, but there is also power requirement on the east. And there is where the transmission constraint is. So it's not only the renewable power problem that needs to be resolved when we're looking at getting the clean, affordable power. It's also the transmission issue on ground, right? Because if there is, all our power plants today are suffering curtailment or not getting commissioned because the lines and the substations are not able to commission. So we can't only solve the problem by looking at renewable or storage. Of course, that needs to be in place, but at the same point of time, our transmission constraints also need to be resolved. So there is equal and enough opportunity, not only on the renewable side, but equally on the transmission side, sir, which needs to be looked into today. And I'm sure the private players are willing to do that. But again, in India, the constraint is land, right of way. ये मेरी ज़मीन है, मैं नहीं दूँगा.
मैं अपनी झांसी नहीं दूँगी.
Correct. So completely understand. So government has to pitch into and find a solution. They are trying to do. I'm not saying that there aren't steps taken, but still from MNRE, MOP to on ground, that is taking a long time. Apart from that, sorry, just last one point. There is a lot of things that people are doing at the central level. But now with the ISTS waiver going away and demand of data centers being more region specific, states need to start working towards it. Because if there's a data center coming in Maharashtra, it's the Maharashtra state which needs to give them the comfort and help them meet the demand. So apart from the central, what all central has been doing now, each and every state which has huge demand as well as huge renewable capacity also needs to come forward and take those steps to make investments for private sector viable.
Thank you. Thanks you brought this curtailment issue because my own experience when I was in renewable energy was I went to a state which has a huge potential for wind energy, and then the association people met me and I said, you have the right of way. I mean, kahani kagaz pe to you have a right of way. And they said, no, we have to curtail this power. I said, why? I said, do you get instruction? They said, nahi sahab, isme instruction nahi milta hai. Executive engineer ke phone se, office se phone aata hai, usko back down karo. And I estimated that the annual was probably some 1 billion unit or so. And as Secretary Renewable Energy, I skipped a heartbeat. And I said, then why don't you link it with hydro? Because pump storage is something which we know. And the pump store and the hydro was close by, but in between there was boundary of the state number 2. I won't name the states. It's not a film called Two States. One can make a very good film, Two States, on that. These two states won't cooperate with each other because there were two opposition political parties in power. And the center won't bother because दिल्ली में क्या होता है, दिल्ली के पास कुछ हो जाए तो हम बड़ा तुरंत लगते हैं ये उतनी दूर कौन जाएगा. मतलब हमेशा मुगल दरबार में क्या हुआ कि प्रॉब्लमेटिक प्रिंस को या तो दक्षिण के सूबे में भेज दिया या बंगाल में भेज दिया. So I realize that this kind of de facto curtailment of renewable energy and de jure lip service to renewable energy is something which is not going to work. But then I think this round brings me to the second round, which can actually be brief. And that's the question which I would have as a ill-informed policymaker, which I always used to be, and the people sitting there, कि यार demand बढ़ रही है, demand का problem नहीं है, पैसे का problem नहीं है, और problem क्या है फिर? So I think we'll go around the same thing. So Mr. Narasimhan, we'll start with him. That if someone tells you, ki, what is your wish list? You suggest 2 reforms. Ki, ya, baki sab chhod do. Do these 2 reforms. Things will, our run rate may not go to 12, but 7 se 9 pe to chali jayegi. So just two suggestions each from each of the panelists, because I'm being signaled ki time kam pad raha hai. Yeah.
Renewable curtailment, am I audible? Yeah, so the renewable curtailment, whatever used to happen in the past. Yeah, whatever used to happen in the past, like till about 2021. So that's a distortion. I think it's not worthwhile discussing that here, because that's more in the nature of a commercial curtailment, and because most of the RE which used to be curtailed, the tariff, the feed-in tariff was of the order of 556 rupees a unit, and the market prices were much low. So, and during the COVID period, there was no increase in demand. So it's a distortion. I think there's no point discussing. But what is happening, even in Chandna, she showed 21st May incident. So whatever curtailment that was mentioned, that doesn't include 12 to 13 gigawatt of ISTS or interstate transmission system connected RE, which is curtailed almost 90-95%, because the transmission lines have been delayed. They've been planned but delayed. So it doesn't include that 12 to 13 gigawatt, which is a concern to most of the RE developers. And for that, like recognizing, see, one thing, there would be delays in transmission. We cannot totally shy away from that, and whatever we have been able to build, India has 10% of the world's transmission network in India. The US has 3 times the geographical area, but still the same circuit kilometers what India has. So, and that too in a populous country like India. So, there are going to be delays. Now, looking at that, the last 1.5 years, I've been a part of the National Committee on Transmission, where all these proposals are given. So I have tried to look at why are we not implementing a non-wires alternative, which means that if 6 gigawatt plant is coming up in Rajasthan, solar, why do you need to lay transmission lines up to UP costing 30,000 crores? You could as well put 6 gigawatt 5-hour storage in Rajasthan itself, and that would save a lot of problems. You would get 5 hours of capacity during the non-solar hours. The batteries would provide so many other services like frequency, voltage control, and it's working out cheaper. Even if I assume $125 per kilowatt hour, the replacement of batteries at the end of 15 years, even then for a 25-year, if we evaluate, it works out cheaper because there would be revenues from arbitrage, right? You would be able to charge cheaper, and so this is something which we need to look at seriously, and I had proposed that these assets could come up as a transmission asset rather than, because the problem, what's happening is, the moment SECI comes out with a bid and everything for peak hour, then they say we are not finding any buyers. So PPA doesn't get signed. All those problems get attacked if we plan it as a transmission asset, and that is the first. Second is on coal flexibility. Unfortunately, we have hit a wall. Like 55% mandate is there in CA regulations, At the central level, we have implemented, but many of the states, they have not implemented minimum operating level of 55%. The CA regulations talk about 40%, but we have hit a wall. Even NTPC and large generators, they're not in favor of going below 55% to 40. So that is something which we need to seriously look at.
We need to crack that.
Pardon?
We need to crack that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So these are the two things. Of course, the third, if you like, more important, where we are losing valuable time. And you mentioned about standards. So I would agree with you if just 10 megawatt of RE is being connected at a point. But here we are talking in gigawatt scale, and the whole thing, 5 gigawatt and one substation. So standards become very important. And unfortunately, we lag behind, in upgrading your standards. Today the standards are not applicable for battery energy storage system. And we are tendering, gigawatt scale batteries, but the standards are not in place. So then it becomes a problem, like if I want fast response from batteries, primary response, if it is not mentioned in the standard, then the vendor would
Fair
try
enough.
to run away with it. So
Fair
this is
enough.
the third.
Nilesh, two wish lists.
Yeah, so what I discussed earlier, I will continue on that, from distribution point of view and from, giving a very optimum power tariff to the customer. And to take forward, Narif Sevan sir said, the battery. So we are pushing, battery will play a very important role in optimization of the cost of managing a network and even the transmission corridor altogether. So battery at a generation end avoids curtailment. Battery at the distribution end do the peak load management and all. And battery behind the customer, behind the meter, battery will play a very important role to optimize, the electricity cost of the customer as well as giving the maximum green energy and utilization of the green energy. A second thing is that the demand response program is something we have rolled out in Delhi, Mumbai and all. That should be something standardized and made people participate and all. And Mumbai, let me tell you, it is a fantastic experience. We have many big customers and they are running gas generators. And we have requested them that during daytime when we have an excess of solar power, if you, just stop your gas generators, we will pay you 3-4 rupees per unit, as an incentive, So a demand response program is not only a demand optimization, it is also a demand enhancement. And we have seen that instead of doing a distress sale, we have asked our customers to reduce, their own captive generation and increase the demand from the utility. We have paid them. We have asked people to optimize the demand, we have paid them. And as well as we have asked our customer to shift the demand. For example, the government customers like Mumbai Mahanagar Palika, we have asked them, instead of, starting pump in the evening 5:30, can you start at 3:45 or 4 o'clock? And, such initiatives making customers happy, more inclusive, more participative, and that really helped, to, optimize the cost. My wish list is, if the demand response program, customer participative program will be really launched, across and make more people aware and participate, that will really help, to do the peak management, and it will be a win-win situation.
Oh, that's an excellent idea. I mean, essentially demand staggering using
Absolutely,
customer cooperation. So I think WRI take a note and write a chota policy paper, and then we'll see where it can be pushed. That brings me to Vivek. Chandana, your assignment is ready.
I think as a private sector participant in this sector, in the energy sector, our ask would be I think to take Sir's point on standardization, I like the word. I think to use that just give us more predictability on what you expect and allow that to pan out, because largely, so the beauty of what we do and where we operate is the fact that today corporate customers are saving 30-40% in the price of power because of renewables. So that means there is great headroom that they have, that they can absorb some increases in costs if it is required and necessary for the country and it is strategic. So take, for example, India trying to be Atmanirbhar in this space and say we must bring in domestic manufacturing, very well respected. But the imposition, for example, of that the cells should also be domestically made with not enough time given to corporate customers to adhere to it makes it really challenging. Because more than anything else, what investors in firms like ours get rattled is the variance of the IRR. The IRR being a couple of percentage lower or higher is a point of discussion to any investor that can be managed. But if it varies wildly, if your project is ready but cannot be commissioned, we had a project on the ISTS CTU side, which we waited close to about 8 months for Con4 approvals to come about because the standards had changed. Now, this was phase 2 of a project where phase 1 was already commissioned with older standards, which is fine. I mean, we can improve and the standards can go up, but shouldn't enough notice and insight be given to developers who are putting this process, because they came to you for preliminary approvals, you gave them the preliminary approvals. So it is this consistency in the standards which has, of course, a great bearing for how the grid operates and how the grid can be managed, but it has an even greater bearing on how monies can come in, how investors are comfortable about the sector, and how eventually the sector can continue to grow. The facts today, sir, is that if India needs about, just for year-on-year growth, we need about, just if you take solar equivalents, we need about 100 gigawatt of new capacity coming online every year. We are doing half of that as we stand. So even new capacity, new energy demand is not being catered to by renewables. And we have a massive job to bring down our coal proportion or thermal proportion down to at least 50% is the target we have set ourselves for. So I think there is a lot we can do here. We just need, and even consistency between states. It's not rocket science. I mean, in certain states, I can commission 2 turbines on the fly. In certain states, I have to wait for the whole plant to be ready before it can be given a switch-on signal. Simple ones that clearly is not a technical issue, it's just a policy issue.
Okay, so you are answering that question, कि फिर problem क्या है? Essentially, you are saying, no surprises, please, consistency, and absence of cussedness. Now, you have not said that, but I think when you go, where you hit the wall is this cussedness, कि aham brahmasmi, because I am sitting there, and the closer you are to Bhavan, the farther you are away from the solution. No disrespect to the phrase on the church. And I think that probably, I could see Roshni smiling. She says, "Kam se kam mujhe to Roshni nazar aa gayi." That the one thing that the private capital will say, कि वो retrospective tax जो लगाया था ना इंडिया के finance minister ने, बस उतना छोड़ दो, फिर हम आने के लिए तैयार हैं. So this element of surprise. So if you look at, if you're a sympathetic listener to Vivek and say कि अच्छा I can.
I was just echoing him because I completely agree with him.
So I am saying, no. So now the important task on you is, no, suppose your pocket has $1 million. Abhi you say, no surprise, yeah, I mean, wo hoga to you can give me some mithai. But then the bad news is I am asking you to invest. So, and there is this policymaker sitting, NP Singh साहब बैठे हुए हैं, MNRE वाले हमारे, तो we work together. So you are going to him and say, मैं $1 million लगाने के लिए तैयार हूँ. But ये नहीं चाहिए. In fact, I tell you about one particular policy initiative where I talked to health secretary. He was known to me. I said, तुम्हारी पैसे नहीं चाहिए, अडंगा मत लगाना. Okay, so he says, ये क्या बात हुई? I said, मैं बता रहा हूँ ना. And that policy actually came in. I have written it in one of my blogs recently. So if you have that $1 million for which I am going to get my mithai, but bad news is you are going to NP Singh साहब and say कि ये मैं लगाने के लिए तैयार हूँ. But these are the 3 don'ts, no fourth one. उन्होंने एक bonus ले लिया, no fourth one. Which are the 3?
So one, I think what Vivek said, that clarity. It can't be that suddenly MNRE will change the regulations, right? Like I think from grid forming inverters to grid following to grid forming is what has come up. But I think we need time to implement it. So I think certainty is on the regulation side is one thing that as private sector we need. We understand that sector needs evolvement, but at the same time, we need certainty. So if there is going to be a regulation change, there has to be enough time given to us. Second, our interests need to be protected. Our shareholders' interests need to be protected. That is one thing. Second thing is, I need the support from the local government on land and ROW. So I don't want the adanga from them on the land and ROW, or I need the support, let me say like that, which helps my plant as well as my transmission plant to come on time. So I can then supply on time. So these are the two things. And third is, I want all my approvals at the central level to flow on. I think they have done a fantastic job when it comes to MOEF approvals and stuff like that, which probably needs to be looked when we're looking at. So storage, I think, is what has become mandatory with renewable, but there isn't a lot of clarity on what all I need to do for an environment clearance on storage, what I need to do for the regulatory clearance. So I think as a private sector developer, if I have that clarity, I can work on time. And as he said, it shouldn't be a time where I'm ready to commission, oh, but aapke paas ye kagaz nahi hai. So from the storage perspective, clarity on regulation beforehand will help private sector to be ready to commission on time, because storage is not like a good to have thing now, right? It's become a mandatory thing. We're talking about battery storage today. Going forward, we'll have to talk about green hydrogen and PSP, because battery storage is an immediate solution to our problem, but our long-term solution has to be a mix of storage, PSP and green hydrogen put together. So I would need the government to support BESS today, because I'm putting in money in BESS, but have the fourth seeing thing that PSP and green hydrogen also need to be bring in, because they're different kind of storages, right? Green hydrogen helps seasonal variations. Battery helps immediate solution, like सुबह का power store करके शाम को देने के लिए, which is the immediate problem of our country today. So yeah, these are the three do's or the don'ts which I've tried to conclude, sir.
Thank you very much. Now, the toughest question is for Chandana, because she is a self-professed aggregator of ideas. अभी आपके CV से पढ़ रहा हूँ मैं, अब मेरे दिमाग से नहीं है. So looking at this, if you have to say, now 3 + 2 + 2 + 3 जितना हो गया. Now if you have to shorten it to these are the 3 things I need, and don't look at your bosses एकदम frankly कि ये मांगता है अपने को बॉम्बे के लैंग्वेज में. What are the 3 things, and any quick rapid fire 1 minute comment that you have on this whole mess that I created by asking these questions?
I don't think, sir, you created a mess, because आपने मिठाई के बाद भी किया and you also shared your experience, so not from that. I'm not looking at my boss, so Bharat, I'm not looking at you. How I look at this problem is, like, some words, there are many keywords that are emerging in this discussion, and it is a multifaceted problem. Where I started the conversation is that an engineer is not going to be able to solve this problem. It needs a large set of people to look at the problem. One thing that I would always comment on is, what about the people who are most vulnerable to climate change? Because a larger share of our population, the common man, is extremely vulnerable to climate change. Vivek, yes, I know you deal with corporates, they have money, but from a research perspective, I would want to stand with those people who lack access to cooling, who may lack access to cooking in a future. They might have problems with affordable power. They might have problems with reliability also, sir. Sir, it might be a honest truth, sir. Nilesh Kane sir is here. The person who may lose power first when there is a power surge might be a home, not a corporate consumer. It might be very true because of the world we live in. So it is a difficult puzzle. What I would want is, we need everybody to come on board. So Vivek is definitely can talk about the corporate. Narasimhan sir very definitely, and the grid operators can talk about the grid perspectives. Nilesh sir can bring in the perspectives of need for demand response as well as storage. Somewhere it doesn't need to be at the cost of the person who has the most challenges when it comes to climate change, is probably where I would put my money on. I hope I'm right for looking at it as a WRI approach as well, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that is very well put, but this was slightly out of syllabus in the sense, in this panel we are talking about the macro problem. I mean, I completely agree with you. The India usually takes a stand कि problem is created by Bharat. हमारे सारे problem भारत create करता है, and क्या करें, you know, Bharat is a wicked problem. So, but then, yeah, I think you have very well summed it up. But if they get their act together, the elbow room which will be created there. So, for example, 40% demand is industry. Okay, if their efficiency brings it down even by 5%, that gives a much larger elbow room to the people that you are talking about. But then, as I said, that part which you have said is very right, but was not exactly within the scope of our discussion. I'll just close by saying, going back again to the same thing, कैसी गाय चाहिए? So it reminds me of a शेर कि हजारों ख्वाहिशें ऐसी कि हर ख्वाहिश पे दम निकले, बहुत निकले मेरे अरमा लेकिन फिर भी कम निकले. तो ये सब की, बट इन्होंने सब ने अपनी ख्वाहिशों को 1000 की जगह 2-3 बना दिया है. बट आई थिंक WRI कैन प्रोबेबली list this out because I see some clear doables. So what we could do is we could arrange in terms of the doables. It's like, you know, doable to desirable. वो अंधेरी से चर्च गेट. तो we go to government कि यार वो अंधेरी से उसको गाड़ी को सांता क्रूज तक भेज दो, you know, दादर तक भेज दो. So I think if you do that, and one important point that you said about the state governments, I think center ज्ञान दे देगा. काम करना है स्टेट को. So if you go to the state, you might have an interesting differential experience, and very typically if one state shows you how it is to be done, next state में जाने पे वो secretary क्या पूछेगा, वो GR का copy ला के देना यार मैं इधर लगाता हूँ. So I think if we can create these doable, because end of the day the message that comes in this particular panel is that demand बढ़ रही है, बढ़ेगी, solutions हैं, पैसे का problem नहीं है. Where are we stuck? So if you are stuck at the policy level and there are 2-3 very identifiable features of that policy, let's try to crack it in terms of the doable chunks rather than straight catapulting to the desirable. So I think that's my ask from the WRI. And Chandana, as I forewarned you, your assignment is, submission date is 7 days. Thank you very much. Thanks for...
Thank you to Professor Agnihotri and our incredible panel for such a grounded, insightful and urgent discussion. I think we are all mesmerized with the insights that have been shared, and it is clear that achieving round-the-clock power while juggling market structures, battery storage economics and transmission corridors will require absolute institutional alignment. To formally close out this plenary, I would like to invite Puneet Khandelwal, who's the Program Head of Energy at WRI India, to the podium to deliver our closing remarks.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Abhishek. And since we started that the question paper was leaked, so when a very smart professor, despite the questions were leaked, he kind of steered the Viva in such a way that he will be able to evaluate. And that's why we are able to come up with concrete thoughts and concrete tracks of work which we have to do in future. And thank you, Satish sir, for doing that. So before I conclude, so let me briefly highlight what are the key points which have emerged. And these are very, very specific points, and how this discussion has converged when we have brought the spectrum of stakeholders together. So one message that clearly emerged today is that India's electricity demand should not be viewed merely as a challenge, and that's what Vivek has highlighted. It's an opportunity also. It's a reflection of economic growth, rising prosperity, industrial development, and our broader development aspirations. And so what Vivek highlighted was that we are taking it as an opportunity. Yes, we are, and that has a stringent requirements, and we have to build the supply system in such a way that we are able to fulfill this demand growth. At the same time, meeting this demand while ensuring power remains clean, affordable, reliable will require a different way of thinking about power sector, and that was highlighted by Narasimhan sir. The discussion highlighted the need for integrated planning across generation, transmission, distribution, storage, demand side flexibility and emerging technologies. And that has been a focal area, is how to support the existing sources of supply through storage and other mechanisms. Further, one of the very important factor which Roshni brought to the discussion is the state perspective, and which is when we have such convening, we always try to govern this from a national lens, and that perspective is very important because the transition will ultimately be shaped at the state level. Demand growth patterns, industrial pathways, renewable resource availability, utility finances, climate conditions, and consumer behavior differ significantly across states. So that state has to bring together national policy and framework, and actually how to execute whatever is being decided and concretely paved for is to be done by the states. And that's what Narasimhan sir also highlighted, that there are a lot of complementarities. So we have a huge demand, a huge generation center located at the western side, and there's very, very scarce resources on the eastern side, and how to manage that at the national level is very important. Further, as Nilesh sir has rightly highlighted, the discussion also reinforced that no single stakeholder actually can address this challenge alone. Government, regulator, utilities, grid operator, industry, investors, researcher, and most importantly, as Nilesh sir highlighted, consumers have now to play a very important role going ahead in managing the demand, whatever demand response program, the kind of demand flexibility, and what are the essential loads, what are the flexible loads, that we have kind of figured it out, and that's how the consumer has to play a more important role. And further, as the private sector, money is important bringing to pool the government sources, the kind of clarity which they need, the kind of consistency in the policy and regulatory, that has also been brought by the panel. So what we understand is that silos need to disappear. Shared knowledge and collaborative action at national and state level can only bring the ecosystem level change. So this is not a one actor kind of a thing which will be able to do that. So India, and what is best is, today we are discussing only electricity. This is electricity, meeting electricity demand. And they have their interdependencies with other sectors. But in the same time, we have to move to a larger ecosystem of energy spectrum, where there are multiple other sources apart from electricity which are actually feeding to the energy requirements of the country. Just for example, as Chandna has highlighted, only 20% of the total industrial demand is being met by the electricity for the commercial and for the industrial sector. So India has demonstrated repeatedly that it can address complex energy challenges at scale. As we look ahead, the question is not whether electricity demand will grow. The question is whether we can use this opportunity to build a power system that is reliable, resilient, affordable, and increasingly clean. And what WRI India is bringing, a very important factor is to, and what Chandna has highlighted, is how to make it more inclusive, and how the equity aspects are addressed when we are doing, which are normally left out in such conversations. So that element has to be spelled out. So I am confident that with the expertise, commitment, collaboration represented in the room, we can easily move closer to that vision. And as Satish sir rightly said, 2070 kisi ne nahi dekha, and I agree with him. But what we can do is that we can pave a way that 2070 mein jaake koi ye nahi bole aap piche baith ke kisi ne baat nahi kare, and now we are having a system that is again a messy. So that's a very positive thing which is coming out of the panel. Thank you everyone. Thank you to the distinguished panelists. Thank you for organizers to curate this session. And also thank you for the wonderful audience for listening, and let's bring more perspective to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Puneet, for providing this excellent synthesis to wrap up our second plenary. I'll request everyone in our esteemed panel to please stand and for the photograph. We have now reached a well-deserved 15-minute tea and coffee break. This is your chance to stretch your legs, recharge your own batteries, and continue these fascinating grid conversations over a hot cup of tea. We will reconvene promptly at 11:40 for our parallel cross-domain roundtables. Today our discussions are split into 4 specialized tracks across different rooms, mapping out actionable low-carbon strategies for industries, infrastructure and transport. Here is a quick map of where you'll need to go next. Our roundtable 1 is on scaling low-carbon building materials in Lecture Theatre 104, which discusses how to mainstream supplementary cementitious materials and construction waste-derived products. The roundtable on low-carbon innovations for low-medium heat electrification is in Lecture Class 101. This track unpacks the role of R&D, venture capital and policy catalysts in accelerating the electrification. The roundtable 3 on financing the scale-up of industrial decarbonization technologies and Lecture Theatre 105, which will look at the risk allocation structures, blended financing mechanisms, and green capital investments needed to technologies that are still in the lab testing phases. Last but not the least, powering the freight transition roundtable in Lecture Theatre 106. This will bring together commercial fleet operators and DISCOMs to examine how grid utilities are actively planning infrastructure for medium and heavy duty trucks. Please make your way out to the foyer for refreshments now and ensure you are at the chosen lecture theatre by 11:40 a.m. sharp so we can keep our transition perfectly synchronized. Enjoy.